Coming up on our Finding Better podcast, I've got Tom Hagerty with me. Tom is the author of the book called The Business of Relationships. We're going to talk about relationships, not only in business, but all over your personal relationships, your family relationships, your friend relationships, your business relationships with your boss, with your coworkers, with your support. We're going to talk about all manner of relationships, and it's just amazing because that's what makes the world go round. And here's the thing. One of the things that we talk about is that 60% of folks out there identify loneliness as being their most common companion. And they are just absent relationships. Please join us. Please share. It's amazing stuff. Here we go. Hello, 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 and welcome back to our Finding Better podcast. My name is John Suzuki, and I am your host. And this is where we share real life experiences. We don't share academics, we don't share theories, we don't share opinions. That's the last thing we're going to share. We share actual experiences of things we've done where we've been there and done that. Because sometimes the best path to success is to copy it. And this is a safe place where nobody here wants anything from you. We're just here to talk about things that we've done. So you might want to pattern some of those things for your own life. I have a wonderful, wonderful guest today. I'm so excited. Tom Hagerty is with us. And Tom recently wrote the book, The Business of Relationships, right? You guys who have been with me for a while know that this is right up my alley. And the subtitle is Using the Wisdom of Great Executives to Create Thriving Personal Connections. Okay? So he's talking about wisdom. Wisdom is experiences. I mean, this is going to be so much fun. Okay, so one thing that we have in common is that we're both grandfathers. Okay, he's got 3 adult kids and 4 grandchildren. They call him Papa. I've got 2 adult kids and 3 grandkids, and they call me Papa too. It's just amazing. So this is really cool. So Tom, welcome to Finding Better. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure. I've looked forward to this for a long time.
Oh my gosh, we've got so much to talk about, and you know, uh, I'm just gonna tell us a little bit about you. You're in Cincinnati, Ohio, but what was it, and tell us about the business of relationships and what
Sure.
that means to you, and how you came to writing a book about it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll make the best effort in the shortest period of time.
There
How's
you
that?
go. Perfect.
The Business of Relationships is the book that was never intended to be a book. And I say that because it
Cool.
started out because I am a passionate collector of quotes. I love business quotes. I have quotes from musicians, politicians, religious leaders, anything that I think will either A, inspire me, and B, point me in a different direction, if you will, and I can
Yep.
interpret those quotes in different ways. I started out writing some of these quotes out and seeing if they would extend into personal relationships. For instance, Jack Welch said, change before you have to. He said that in a business context to business leaders at GE when he warned them that if they weren't number one or number two in their marketplace, he would fix them, close them, or sell them.
You mean the
Pretty
companies? The
direct.
companies part is part of the
The divisions. I'll sell
GE.
the
Okay,
medical division, the aircraft
got it.
division, whatever it was.
Yep.
He was giving them a warning. I looked at change before you have to, and I said, what could that mean in a personal relationship? Could it
Hmm.
mean that you better change before you have to that budding addiction, that bad temper, that financial irresponsibility, that aloof demeanor, that uh, all different kinds of questionable conduct in a
Absolutely.
relationship.
Yeah.
So I started writing these essays. I gave them to my kids. I gave them to a few friends, and somebody suggested a newspaper column, and I poo-pooed that idea for a long time. Didn't want to write one, and then finally I sat down and had lunch with a guy who's a friend of mine who writes for the business press, and he said, man, I love these things. He said, with your permission, I'd like to pitch them to my editors. I think this would be a great column. taking these individual essays and just putting them in the paper every week. And his editors came back and said, "Boy, we love these things too, but the problem is we're not an op-ed newspaper. We're a business fact-based weekly publication that is part of a very large conglomerate, and we do not have a place for advice columns or op-ed pieces and things like that. But tell your friend if he had enough of these, they'd be a book." And I
No
poo-pooed
kidding.
that idea as well. And I continued dabbling and writing and dabbling and writing. And finally, he persuaded me to take a few names of publishers that he knew. And long story short, John, is through a very circuitous set of circumstances, a publisher became interested. They said, "We want to do this." Um, and they came back to me and said, "Well, when will you have the rest of it?" Well, the first half of the book was probably written over an 8-year time frame because it was never intended to be a book.
That's amazing.
The second half of the book, they pretty much gave me a 3-month deadline to submit a manuscript. So the other half of the book was written in a very compressed period of time. I think it's still a quality effort, and I'm very proud of it. But it was literally never intended to be a book. It was it
Well,
was it was
the thing I love about that is that you started with your kids. You started with your kids. You wrote out these little essays and you shared them with your kids. I personally think well, quite a long, I mean, this has been a decade or two now. I've always said, and I will, I just haven't, that I'm going to write a book for my kids. And the book is, because when I think about my family, I know one grandmother. That's it, right? I got four grandparents. I know nothing about my great grandparents. And I think to myself, how cool would it have been if one of them wrote a book about themselves and about their values, about who they are, about what the world was like? Exactly what you're talking about. Essays about experiences and wisdom. And the circuitous route that you took tells me that it was also meant to be, right?
No, I'm a big believer in that, John. I'm a believer and a Christ follower anyway, but I am a very big believer that destiny played a role in this. And
Yeah, and same
when
thing
you
with
talk about, go ahead, I'm
Mhm.
sorry.
No, no. When I talk about what?
No, when you talk about writing for your children, that is probably one of my bigger regrets because my dad has been deceased since 2002. My mom died in 2006. And I would periodically remind myself, you ought to sit down with your dad and a tape recorder and get him to talk to
Yeah.
you about what it was like to be in two wars. Because he not only fought as a tank commander in World War II, he also was called back to fight in Korea. I said, you ought to get him to talk about that. You ought to get him to talk about what was it like to be a commissioned sales guy with no safety net from the government and 10 kids. I'm the oldest of 10 children. And that regret still sits with me from time to time because I didn't do that. And I wish I
Yeah.
had. So this is a way for me to say I left something behind that if people want a bit of a
There you go.
picture of me
There you
as
go.
well as a picture of the executives who are in the book, they'll have one.
Yeah. So note to self, everybody listening, right? Because I lost my dad and I lost my mom, so they're gone. I have that same regret. I never sat down with them and just had a conversation and talked to them and asked them questions. Ask my dad about his experience during World War II. And my dad and I didn't have a very good relationship, and so that would have been a tough one for me to do. But I didn't do that with my mom either. So, folks out there, while you still have your parents, do it while you can. So let's talk about relationships because I am a big believer in relationships, personal relationships, business relationships, the value of relationships. Because I've said many times before, I look at our world today and I say to myself that we've gotten so smart, we've forgotten our heart. And I believe that with the rise of AI and the rise of technology, that we are going to have a renaissance of the heart. And that renaissance is going to start with relationships because that's what business is all about. But without me putting words into your mouth, Tom, tell us about it. Tell us about the value. Tell us about, start off with why it's so important to you that this information get out there.
Well, I think it's important for all of us.
Hmm.
Every single one of us needs to be in relationship with someone or a bunch of someone else's. And I mean, that cuts across any line you want to talk about. If you want to talk about health, you can say that it's a proven fact that relationships that thrive extend longevity. They lower heart rate, they lower cholesterol, they keep you better fit. If you say psychologically, you're going to spend a heck of a lot less time on some therapist's couch if you are in a thriving relationship, if you have a community of people around you. You
Boy,
look at the
isn't that a
major,
trip? But
well,
before you jump off,
yeah,
right? I mean, if you think about, yeah, at least in my experience and seeing folks with things like eating disorders and different kinds of addictions, it sure seems like a huge percentage of those people could do much better if they had good relationships with people.
well, yeah, I'll tell you, in the major religions of the world, if you're talking about the seven big ones, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, Hinduism, every single religion speaks in its scriptures to the primacy of relationships and how those should be mutually beneficial. They say it in different languages, but the sentiment is all the same. We need relationships. The psychologists, I don't care if you're a nihilist or an existentialist or a Jungian or a Freudian or a Stoic or a Cynic, they all speak to relationships. I mean, it is absolutely foundational to the human condition that we be in relationships with each other. And I think we're in a dangerous time right now. I share your optimism in a way about AI, but I look at things in the landscape and I see Gallup poll after Gallup poll, Pew Research Center after Pew Research Center. They're talking about failed relationships,
Yep.
and one of the things, John, that shocked me recently was that in this country of ours, that is the most powerful, the wealthiest, the shining beacon, if you will, of democracy, or is or was at times.
Yep.
Um, all of that we have going for us, uh, you know, our kids, our American kids, it kind of chokes me up to say this. Our American kids are three times more likely to grow up in a single parent household than the rest of the world's average. I mean,
Oh,
think about that for a minute. Three times. We have 60% of our population in America say my constant companion is loneliness. We have
60%?
two 60% say my constant companion is loneliness. And then we have another two-thirds of us, and this really shocked me. Another two-thirds of us say, I fundamentally don't believe that people can be trusted. What does
Yeah.
that say about us? I mean, yes, we're wealthy. Yes, we're an example. Yes, we are the most powerful nation in the history of the world, but those stats don't bode well. And the younger the audience is, the younger the person is, the Gen Z, the more likely they are to skew that average upward, not downward, but upward. So it's a tough time, and we
So
need some
here's the good
help.
news. Here's the good news is that you and I are out here trying to help. You know, I started this podcast because I was a little bit jaded. I started this podcast because my daughter asked me to, right? She says, "Dad, you've done a lot for us and our friends. World needs to hear from you." And I resisted for 12 years. But anyway, so I finally did it because she says, "Dad, forget the haters. Just do your podcast and give it to the universe." And I said, "Okay, great, I can do that, right?" And so the whole genesis of this podcast though was to help people. because you're in your golden years of your career right now. And I believe that we all have three careers. The first is to learn and go to school. The second is to earn for your family, and the third is to return and give back. And what you were just talking about, Tom, the world needs help. The world needs help, and I always share with folks that I believe that we all share a common purpose, and that is to make the world better than the day we landed on it. And so yeah, yeah, that this is part of the reason why I was so excited to have you on our Finding Better podcast is because, you know, as jaded as I was, I started this podcast on January 1st of last year of 24. I have been meeting unbelievably amazing people like you. And it has been through my podcast that these folks have come into my life. And um, my jadedness has evolved a little bit to a little bit more hope than I had before because of folks like you.
It's good.
So
That's good.
yeah, yeah. So thank you for doing what you're doing. So let's talk about the wisdom of the great executives
Okay.
and some of the ideas that you got from them in creating not only creating thriving personal connections, but the value of creating those connections.
Sure. Sure. Um, well, one of my favorites because I worked there is Jack Welch from GE. Okay.
Yep.
And Jack Welch said, I think we talked about this offline a bit in our preamble, so you've heard a bit of this before.
Mm-hmm.
But when Jack Welch became the CEO of General Electric, he was a real tough guy. They call him Neutron Jack because he laid a bunch of people off, but the building stayed, so it was like a neutron bomb. Um, and
Okay.
he went through a lot, and yet still, even though there is revisionist history that now goes on,
Sure.
um, Jack Welch at one time was honored as the executive of the century, not of the year or the decade, but of the century. And whether that was deserving or not, or whether it's right today or not, we can all debate that. But Jack Welch gave a speech to his business leaders, the folks who led the divisions like aircraft and medical and finance and so forth. And the context in which he said, change before you have to. He said,
Mm-hmm.
if you're not number one or number two in your marketplace, I will fix you, close you, or sell you. So change before you have to. He was also big on seeing things
Wow.
as they are, not as you wish they were. But change before you have to came out of that, and that wisdom to me was transcendent of the boardroom or the shareholder letter or the
Sure.
soundbite on CNBC. I looked at it in terms of saying, what does that say about a relationship?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's spousal, whether it's parent to child, whether it's sibling to sibling, whatever that personal relationship
Or
is,
or or
change
friend to
before you,
friend,
or
right?
friend to
Friend to
friend,
friend.
neighbor to
Yeah.
neighbor, golf
Absolutely.
partner to
Yep.
golf partner, whatever it is.
Or your dog. I
Well,
mean,
yeah, my
you
dog
know.
doesn't talk to me.
But your dog loves you,
Yes.
right?
But
And you
but
do have a relationship with it. So anyway,
where
we
I
can talk
point
about that
that
later.
though, where I point that, John, is to say change before you have to, that budding addiction. Change before you have to, that financial irresponsibility that's creating havoc in your family. Change before you have to, that bad temper with the kids. Change before you have to, the aloof, withdrawn demeanor with your wife. Change before you have to, the passive aggressive behavior that gets you nowhere with your friends. Those are the kind of things that I think, for me anyway, transcended the boardroom. Another example would be Bill Gates.
So
Bill
so so
Gates,
before I get to
go
Bill
ahead.
Gates, and I definitely want to talk about
Yeah.
Bill Gates. Um, we talk about change before you have to. There's two things there. There's two things that I want to call out and get your views on. The first one is um, identifying and be able to self-identify or at least understand the behaviors that you should change before you have to. How do you do that? And the second thing is Once that identification of those things happen, there has to be a desire, right? There has to be a desire or a will to change. So with that, are there any? Do you have a couple of one or two anecdotes or tips?
About identifying, self-identifying.
Yeah, yeah.
I
Identifying a
would
desire.
I would say this, as far as the identification is concerned, we need to be fearless about looking in the mirror. Too many of us never want to do that.
Hmm.
You know, we want to project it onto someone else. I think the Stoic philosophers used to say something like, you know, the things we call out in others are in us.
Oh, totally. Oh my
You
gosh,
know,
yes.
so I think there has to be an aspect of fearlessness when it comes to looking in the mirror and being self-aware enough to accurately identify. And then you've got to solicit friends. You know, you have to bring the friends into the equation and say, you know, I'd say to you, John, my wife thinks I have a horrible temper. What about you? Have you seen that? Are there characteristics of it? Am I hiding it? You know, I have to be open enough and transparent enough with people that are close to me to help me with that identification. Now, the desire part to me is the easier of the two because once you identify it's kind of like saying I'm overweight and my doctor tells me I'm unhealthy and I can look in the mirror and see it. I have to do something about it. You know, my health is at risk, my cholesterol's elevated, whatever.
Right.
Um, so to me, that isn't the biggest part of the equation. I think the identification for a lot of us, me included, is always the tough part to look in the mirror in an unvarnished, honest way.
Yeah.
Because once I do that, the desire for me anyway typically follows.
You
Because
know, uh,
it's just too hard for it not to. When you become aware of a problem, it's like driving your car. You know, how long are you going to drive your car when it's backfiring down the street and waking up the neighbors at all hours of the night? You know you have to do something. It ought to be, I need to get this to the shop or it's going to become a lot bigger problem than it is today.
yeah.
And a lot of that is true with our personal lives as well.
Yeah, for sure. And you talked about 60% of people identifying their most their I forget the words, but most common companion as being loneliness,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
Here's a little bit of tough love, folks. If you're one of those people, look in the mirror, okay? And maybe there's something there. Maybe there's something there. Maybe it starts with you. And and I will tell you, my experience has been uh, that Pro I don't know. Almost all the time. I don't. It's always is never the thing when I self-reflect. It's me. It's me. It may not have been me that caused my circumstance, but it's certainly me in not rectifying it because that's my choice. That's your choice. We all have choices, right? And but like you said, Tom, having the courage to look at yourself in the mirror and saying, "Hey, maybe I need to start right there." Could be a really interesting exercise.
I am a big fan recently, I would say within the last 3 or 4 years, have become a big fan of Mark Manson, who's the
Okay.
guy who wrote The Subtle Art of Not Giving a You Know What, and Everything Is You Know What. I think he's an incredible writer. I think he has a great podcast and obviously a big audience. But he said something in one of his books that I really related to. He said, here's the uncomfortable truth. The uncomfortable truth is not only will you and everyone you know die, but everything you do and everything you say will only be remembered by a very few people for a very short period of time.
That's true.
And he went on to say that, you know, for some people, that gives them a free pass to run the car into the guardrails over and over and over again, destroying relationships, destroying families, destroying friendships, because If nobody cares, neither do I. If nobody remembers, neither will I. He
Wow.
flipped it to say where that should go is because of that. You should say, I'm willing to do the best I can at everything I do because if I fail, very few people are going to remember it anyway. You know,
Yeah.
you
Yeah, that
know,
is flipping it.
this
Yep.
well, and this thing we walk around with, John, with this mantle that we put on that everything we do has to somehow measure up to some higher standard than anybody could achieve. That it somehow has to take the have this gravitas around it. And the fact is, just get out and do it. Just get out and make your family better. Just get out and be more accessible, be more transparent, be more loving, be more honest, if you will, more trustworthy, more reliable. Uh, because at the end of the day, if you stub your toe a few times, you're not that important. Nobody's going to remember for eons that you stubbed your toe,
Or day after tomorrow,
or
right?
the day after
Yeah.
tomorrow,
Yeah.
or,
Yeah. Yeah.
or by
So
dinner time.
that's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. All right. So Bill Gates.
Bill Gates said something that resonated with me. He said, success is a lousy teacher because it seduces smart people into thinking they can't lose. And I really resonated with that and said, you know, that spoke to me about relationships too. It spoke to me about a sense of risk in a relationship. And where my book goes, John, just so you're kind of aware of the framework of it, I think we've talked about this before. It really takes 12 qualities of personal relationships and tries to show how these executives' words could apply to those. And the 12 qualities are things that I found through research that, they were in the Harvard Business Review, they were in the Northwestern Journal of Medicine, they were at marriage.com. I mean, a whole host of a variety of different sources. They didn't all name the same 12, but the ones that I picked were all there in them, and it's perspective and it's honesty and trust and risk and change and commitment and resilience and respect and humility and maybe a few others. I don't know if I named 12 of them right there, but um, those are the relationships. And when I took the Gates quote or I took the Jack Welch quote, I said, where could this fit? Where could this illustrate for people an example of change or an example of resilience or an example of risk? And the Gates quote for me spoke about that sense of risk that we all have to have in a thriving relationship. And when you think about the best relationships that you have, I certainly think about it, the best ones that I have. Um, it tends to be the ones where I've taken some risks. I've exposed a part of me that nobody saw before. I've put out an opinion that people are surprised at. I've taken an action or moved in a direction that might have some risk. And risk is really just, anything you do that has the possibility of failure, right? It's not a sure thing. The Gates quote spoke to me about that because of that lesson about being a seducer, if you will, of smart people. You know, it 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 gets us to believe that because I've had success here, 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 and here, that I'm predestined for success all the
And
way through
invincible. Yeah.
and invincible. Uh, I think that was a really smart quote, and I had a lot of fun writing about it. So.
I think that's a brilliant quote because um, it flips the narrative about failure upside down, and that narrative being that there's no such thing as failure. My greatest teacher has been failure, not success, right? And so Gates's quote of success being a seducer of ego, invincibility, all those different kinds of things, is a really, really interesting way to look at it. Yeah.
I had a quote the other day I actually heard it on a podcast, and it spoke to what you just said about failure. This person being interviewed on the podcast said, "Confidence doesn't come from an expectation of success. Confidence comes from a comfort with failure." And
Yeah,
and
that's
it,
right. That's
and
right.
it was really interesting to me because he went on to illustrate. He said when Tom Brady stood in the huddle, now he's retired, but I mean when he stood in the huddle and the game was on the line, he was a very confident person because he said there's a possibility that this pass I'm about to throw in a snowstorm with a 40-mile-an-hour crosswind is going to fall incomplete. But I'm going to try it, because I am comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think there are so many examples of that in life that you say it really comes from you being able to say, I can handle the failure. What I can't handle is not trying at all. And there's a
That's
Jeff
it.
Bezos quote in my book about that very thing. But uh, yeah.
I was just thinking back. I was just reflecting back on some of my own personal experiences, and um, I think about my public speaking. I did lots and lots and lots of speaking. I continue to speak, um, but I wasn't born with a microphone in my hand, right? And people ask me, they say, John, why are you so confident? What, and I tell them things like, well, first of all, when I know what I'm talking about, it's a lot easier than when I'm trying to fake it. And when I'm being sincere and authentic,
Yeah.
I'm not being a fake. I don't have anything to be nervous about. But what you just said was really interesting because um, I have failed. I have had that experience. I never fail. I learned, right?
Hmm.
Of when I gave a presentation that didn't go the way I wanted it to. It still went well,
Right.
but it was from those personal failures, right? That that confidence comes because I'm like, okay, I've done this before. I've I failed at it before. If I fail at it again, so what? I lived through the last one,
Right.
right?
Right.
So
Absolutely.
that's brilliant.
Absolutely.
That's brilliant.
I, I,
Yeah.
I I think we've become soft on that a bit. I think part of the loneliness problem, part of the disaffection, the disenfranchisement, the disengagement when you look at employee-employer relationships, especially in the business world. I'm guilty as charged. I'm a business guy, and that's the direction I come at a lot of these things from. But when you look at that, you see a certain softness with failure, a certain softness with being able to admit that you're not the smartest guy in the room, so to speak, that you need to learn. I think that's a challenge as well, in addition to the other challenges that the American workplace uh, is going through, and evolving. I think softness is going to have to be one of those things that we address at some point because there are too many bruised egos that get bruised by too little. Uh,
Oh yeah. Oh, no kidding. And the softness part of it. What is softness? I've heard people say, I've heard people intimate that caring is weakness, right? And it's amazing to me because I have found that the strongest people in my life have the most humility, and they're the most humble people that I know. And from that, I kind of coined a phrase that ego um, is born of weakness, and humility is born of strength. And
exactly
you
right.
know, you think, and it it
Absolutely. Yeah.
it just in the world that we live in right now, going back to Bill Gates, right? It's interesting that he used the word seduced, right? Because he couldn't keep his family together, and and you can think of, we're talking about famous CEOs that, you know, uh, Apple, Steve Jobs, right? He has been said that on his deathbed he realized I didn't get it. I didn't get the whole thing. I missed out on my family, and that's what it turned. I mean, it's. I remember having a conversation with an aunt of mine who has since passed away, but she says, "You know what, John?" She says, "You know what the number one regret on people's deathbeds is?" And she did a lot of work at nursing homes and stuff. I said, "No." She says, "It's not that they didn't make it to VP. It's not that they didn't make more money. It's not that they didn't get that next promotion." She says, "Universally is I wish I spent more time with my family." And that's all about relationships, right? And that's all about heart. That's all about love. And so one of the things that I'm really excited about is being part of this renaissance of heart, and helping people understand that, in the world that we live in, especially in the world of technology, social media, and all this just yick, right? Um, you guys, let's get back to our humanity. And one of the things that I talk about, Tom, is that in this world of AI, where the concern is that AI is going to take over everything, to a certain extent, that's true. But I think the one thing AI can never replace is our humanity, and our spirit, and our heart. And so that's part of the reason why I was so excited to have you on, is because we are talking about those heart things, right? In helping people, yeah, bring people together.
I think AI is a tremendous thing, and I'm one of those people that has enough of a horizon of time that I remember when it wasn't AI, it was called machine learning, and
Yep.
before that, it was called search, and before, so we've had this around. There's a book out there. You've probably seen it, The Singularity,
Oh, sure.
by Ray Kurzweil, and then he wrote a sequel to that just recently called The Singularity is Nearer. And it's that wedding of machine knowledge with human knowledge, and how we interact with it and so forth. But one of the things he said in that book struck me. He said, we have to be careful not to become God, because in our hands right now, in this thing called our iPhone, or our, maybe it's an Android for some, um, it can give you instantaneous access to the world's knowledge. Somebody said a long time ago that the average human being today will be exposed to more information in one day than a person in the 1400s would have been exposed to in his or her entire life. And I think the seduction, to Gates's quote about success, the seduction is, all of a sudden I'm God. I don't need you, John. I've got everything I need right in my hand here, and I can tell you minute by minute what's going on in Ukraine, minute by minute what the weather is in Killarney, Ireland, minute by minute what the stock market is. Anything you want to know, anything you think you know, I've got it right here already, and it's faster than you are. And I think that's an interesting way for him to have put it, that we have to be
Hmm.
careful not to think we're God. And I think
Yeah.
when we look at some of the relationship challenges that we're facing, um, we see that playing itself out in very insidious ways in business. We have terms now called workplace ghosting, and quiet quitting, and bare minimum Mondays, and retired in place, RIP. And especially with the workplace ghosting, a little bit of reading that I've done recently on that, it fundamentally comes from a lack of relationship. That that an employee can leave his employer and ghost them, not respond to calls from HR, not respond to calls to his boss, never communicating that I quit, never even communicating that I went somewhere else for this reason. Uh, they simply say, you know what? I have no long term value in maintaining contact. I was burned out and stressed out, and you didn't listen to me. Therefore, it's an act of self preservation for me, and I am simply exercising my right to say goodbye to you without saying goodbye, without ever
Well,
bringing closure.
that's
It's
really sad to me. That's
yeah,
really
it
sad to me.
is.
And
It is.
and you know, kind of under what I said before, we've gotten so smart we've forgotten our heart.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I try to teach people is everything you do has consequences. And choose your consequence. Um, in the case of ghosting, right? I mean,
Can I
it's
use that quote in my next book, by the way? Choose your consequence.
yeah, absolutely.
Attribute it to you and
Am I going to be in your
write
next
all
book?
about you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And if you want to talk about that, I mean, you could come up with 3 chapters on that, right? But I totally believe, and my audience has heard this time and time again, that your life is a product of the choices that you've made. And when people go, "Well, John, I couldn't choose my parents," I go, "Okay, okay. Then do you agree with this statement that the product of your life in the future is going to be determined by the choices you make from now on?" And everybody says yes, right? And I take it to the next point to what you just said, that every choice has a consequence. And if you think about your choices from the perspective of the result of those choices, sometimes it changes you. Sometimes it kind of shifts your thinking.
Absolutely.
And this whole podcast is about finding better, right? And at one of its cores, the way you find better is you make better choices, right?
Mhm.
And sometimes making uh, the easy choices don't work out so well
I
usually.
think, quite frankly, the biggest choice we make in every single endeavor is what our response is going to be. Because failure is going to come,
Yep.
success is going to come, people are going to come in and out of your lives. You can say all you want about, gee, I was doomed from the start because I had abusive parents, or I had blue collar parents, or I had absent parents, or whatever. Well, that was the circumstance you were dealt. That was the hand that you had to play. But your response dictates everything. It is not the circumstance, it's the response.
You're absolutely right. So there's the title of your chapter. Choose your response, choose your consequence. Yeah, that's awesome.
You got
That's
it.
awesome.
We need to
Yeah.
co-write a book, John. We
I
we
you
need to
know what?
co-write a book,
That would be so much fun. That would be so
you
much
know.
fun because as I said from the very beginning of this podcast, I knew that you and I were connecting at a higher level than normal.
Yeah.
And yeah, that would be way fun. That would be way fun.
Anyway,
So, all right. So, I want to have you back. I mean, if you
yeah.
if you'd like to come back at some point in time, I'm already telling you you are invited anytime because we can talk
It,
about
it,
all manner of things.
it,
And
it, it would be great. Are we pulling the wagons in and coming to an end? Is that my signal?
yeah, maybe
Okay.
if we want to keep on going, we can.
Well,
I want to be
I've got
respectful
one
of your
quote
time.
I want to leave you with, because
Yes,
I
please.
I I, I gave you a couple of quotes that were decidedly male executives, and we all know that's the way the business world is skewed.
Yep.
But a quote that really meant a lot to me. It spoke to me about resilience. Okay, and I
Good.
wrote about it in my chapter on resilience. It's from Sheryl Sandberg. Okay, and Sheryl Sandberg, I mean, has a long track record of success, all the way back to the Clinton administration when she was secretary to, or administrative assistant to the Secretary of the Treasury, all the way up through her experiences at Google and then at Facebook, and suffered through the Cambridge Analytica scandal and all that. Sheryl Sandberg, in addition, by the way, her husband died when they were on vacation. together. So she
Mm.
suffered a sudden death of her spouse, her partner.
Yeah.
Um, and what she said that struck me, she had a quote, and she said, "Each one of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done." She
Each
didn't
one of us is
say,
more than the worst thing we've ever done. Okay.
yeah, and to me that spoke to me about resilience because she didn't say only the ones who pray, or only the ones who were born rich, or only the ones who are pretty smart. She said, each one of us, every one of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. And when you look at her circumstances and extrapolate that out into a relationship, you can say, boy, there's a recipe for bouncing back. You know, that you acknowledge that you've done something pretty awful, whatever that awful is to you in a relationship, but you are more than that. You're better than that. You can rebound from that. You can excel from that position. Um, and it kind of, in a way, dovetailed for me in the same chapter. Um, I included a quote from J.K. Rowling, of Harry Potter fame. And Rowling, you'd say, well, why did you include an author in your business quote? She's not a business executive.
Oh
She's
my
an author.
gosh. Oh,
And you say,
okay.
well,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
let's put it this way. She runs a $1 billion
That's right.
business.
That's right. That's
Okay.
right.
Billion with a B. And J.K. Rowling said that rock bottom was the firm foundation upon which she built her life. And that's the reality for many of us. If you're not going to be able to psychologically, emotionally, physically rebound from setbacks, you got a tough way to go. You're gonna have a lot of years that are just really, really bitter and ugly because you just don't have that cultivated ability to rebound. So I wanted to
So
leave you with two of those quotes
that
because
is really
we
good.
we were a bit unequal in our citations earlier,
Yeah,
concentrating
no,
on
I
only.
totally appreciate that. And you know what? To my audience out there, there's a lot to unwind in this conversation, right? Tom shared a lot of things with us, and here's the fact of the matter: shit's gonna happen. It's just gonna happen, right? I mean, life's not fair, and one of the things that we just talked about is how are you going to rebound from it? You are going to respond to it, right? You can respond to it by not responding to it. That's a response. Or you can respond to it by pulling up your bootstraps and getting back on that horse. And so I personally happen to be a believer in the latter that and folks just expect it. Just expect it. Life's not fair. Shit's gonna happen. And just know, choose your consequence and choose your response. And it's if you just take that away from this conversation, wow. If you rewind this and listen to it one or two more times, you'll get even more out of it. Tom, this has been amazing. This has been amazing, and I
Been
can
my
tell that
pleasure, John.
you're a very thoughtful person, um, both externally and inwardly. And so, yeah, definitely want to have you back. And if folks want to get more information about you and your book, where do they go?
Well, they can buy the book on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. It's available in bookstores as well, but the title of the book is The Business of Relationships. And they can email me if they were interested in either speaking, a consultation, training, something like that. And the email address is Hagerty TP. That's Hagerty TP, like Thomas Patrick at gmail.com.
Okay. Okay, you got that. The other thing, Tom, I invite you to do is to send me an information sheet with your contact information and so forth, and I can load that on my website at johnsuzuki.com, so people can go
Fantastic.
there and get your information. So with that, Tom, thank you again for joining me. I love you. God bless you.
John,
Everybody
thank
out there,
you.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. This has been so much fun. I told
You,
you that, you asked me early on and you said, or before we started, how long do you like to go? And I said between 30 and 60 minutes. And I sensed that you were like, really? You want to go that long? And I told you that this conversation is going to go fast. And so it did. It did.
yeah,
So with that, everybody, please subscribe. Please share this because it's about the business of relationships and relationships in business. I mean, you could flip those words around. And with that, I love you all. God bless you all, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again for joining me.
thank you, John. Thanks
Bye.
to everyone.